All Indiana Politics
is your premier source for Indiana politics.
Focusing on issues that matter to you.
I still want us to be the best in the Midwest.
We can't afford another lockdown.
Give the citizens of this country the relief they need.
Education in the state of Indiana remains priority number one.
In-depth, nonpartisan coverage.
We don't know exactly where the economy will be in January.
People are worried with good reason.
Exclusive interviews with Indiana's political leaders.
We have the resources here in the state of Indiana to care for those who are in need.
Expert analysis on critical legislation.
We need to reform those laws.
This recovery is going to take some time.
We've got to anticipate that there'll be a budget shortfall.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
I'm Garret Bergquist, government reporter for Wish TV and the producer of All Indiana Politics. After Vice President Kamala Harris was nominated for president at the Democratic National Convention, a dozen Republican former White House lawyers endorsed her. All of them worked in the administrations of Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, or George W. Bush. Peter Rusthoven is one of them. He's a lawyer here in Indianapolis. He was associate counsel to Reagan throughout his first term and was a campaign spokesperson during Reagan's 1980 campaign. I talked to him about his decision to endorse Harris. Joining us now is former White House associate counsel Peter Rusthoven. Peter, thank you for coming in today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So you're one of a dozen former White House lawyers who worked in Republican administrations and have endorsed Kamala Harris for president. What led you to that?
I think that one of the things you learn working in the White House, and one of the things I think Americans just learn, is that a character is far more important than where you stand on any tax issue, any economic issue. And in this case, I agree with, candidly, a number of former Donald Trump cabinet officers, as well as his vice president, that he's manifestly unfit for office, and therefore should not again hold that office. One of the things that distinguishes us, distinguishes this country from other parts of the world. But one thing until 2020 we could claim was we always had the peaceful transfer of power. And any president who tries to fight the peaceful transfer of power, who incites others to end up storming the Capitol, and in an incident where 5 people lost their lives, to my mind, should never again hold the office of President of the United States.
How did this group endorsement come about?
Oh, I think many of us know each other and have talked about it and share the same views, not identically on every issue, but we're all pretty much conservatives. That's why we worked in those administrations. If you want to talk tax policy or size, what the size and scope of government should be, that's why I've been for Reagan since he gave a speech in 1964 for Barry Goldwater when I was not even in my teens. But we share those views. But the other view we share is the one I just tried to articulate, which is a deep love for the country, a recognition that whatever our differences with those in another party or on a particular policy issue, we share a commitment to fundamental rules of decency, the rule of law, and democracy. And in talking about it, I just decided, at some point you take a stand. And whether our stand is particularly important or not, if it affects anybody to know the people who worked for Ronald Reagan, people who worked for George H.W. Bush, people who worked for George W. Bush, who have profoundly conservative political views, believe that it's far, far more important that the person we elect as president be someone who will accept the results of elections and someone who will not attempt to overthrow them, and that we get back to what we used to be as a country and, candidly, what we used to be as a Republican Party.
What conversations have you had with other Republicans about this endorsement?
I've had conversations over the last couple of years with a number of other Republicans, and it's very interesting. A great many people who even publicly support Donald Trump will privately tell you that they think that he lacks the character and depth and integrity to be president of the United States, but for their own reasons, whether they involve political survival or whatever pressure they feel from their own contemporaries in Republican politics are unwilling to say so. There are very, very few who, among the people I've known in politics and who've been active, who will defend him on the merits. Some of them believe that that issues on which they disagree with Kamala Harris or the Democrats, including things like taxes, you name it. Some of them believe that those issues are more important than Donald Trump's failings. I candidly disagree with that and disagree rather profoundly with it, but I respect them for their views. I just think they're mistaken. And others are candidly just appalled and deeply saddened by what has happened to our country since Donald Trump rolled down the escalator and in my view has appealed to and stirred up resentment and anger and a country in which you hate the people who disagree with you, which is just profoundly wrong about the history of our country and for the future of our country.
In trying to keep Donald Trump out of the Oval Office, though, why endorse someone whose track record and whose policy proposals are frankly at cross purposes with the ideals of pre-Trump conservatism?
Many of them are. In some ways, it was very interesting listening to her acceptance speech. It was very moderate in tone. There were lots of lines in that acceptance speech that could have been delivered in an acceptance speech by Ronald Reagan or an acceptance speech by Barack Obama, trying to appeal, and I think sincerely so, to sort of things we have in common. What's more important? That's what it comes down to. What's more important for what we are as a people and where we move on from here? One of these two individuals is going to be President of the United States come January of 2025. It is, to use the term, it's a binary choice. It's him or it's her. Which of them do you believe is better for the country? Is either of them disqualified by reasons of character and integrity? I mean, the answer for her, she's not disqualified by reasons of character and integrity. She is a center left and maybe even leans a little more left than she does center. But she's going to accept the results of the election. She is not going to do something fundamentally irresponsible in terms of the core values of the country, which have to do with respecting opponents, respecting the results of elections. And candidly, if you listen to her campaign, she's not the one who was doing things like calling names or, good heavens, let's just talk about how we want our children to behave. You have a former candidate for president who says things like, I'm better looking than she is. Seriously? This is how you talk if you want to be president of the United States? You have, if you read the things he posts on Twitter, now X, if you read the things he says in speeches, he will say in the course of weeks things that throughout our history would have disqualified anyone else from serving in the office. I recognize that people have very strong feelings about this, and that's fine. And I think we should respect people whose views differ from our own. But at some level, we have to have a consensus about the sort of baseline character, integrity, trustworthiness of the person who holds that office. And if anyone has demonstrated candidly that he is about himself, I'm not even sure on the issues that we describe as differences between Republicans and Democrats. It's not clear to me that he really has any deep personal convictions. He has been all over the lot, for example, on an issue about which I care, which is protection of unborn life, and he's now moving away from that yet again. I don't think anyone can candidly look at him and deny what they see. If any Democrat candidate had done a tenth of the things, had said a tenth of the things that Donald Trump has said, and to which we've now all become, sort of used to in a way that it doesn't shock us anymore. If any Democrat candidate had said those things, Republicans, including those who support Donald Trump, would be all over that person. So, one other way of putting it. This is a man who tried to hold up foreign aid to a country that's important to us and in important opposition to Vladimir Putin, tried to hold up aid to that country that Congress had authorized unless they would agree to try and dig up dirt on his opponent in 2020, which was Joe Biden. Who does that? Who does that and is worthy of that office? You're familiar, Garrett, with decision trees. This question, then this question, then this question. Well, I think the first question you ask on a decision tree for president is, does this person have the character or integrity to serve in the office? And if the answer to that question is no, it's sort of like skip all the other questions. Another question way at the top of the list is, do you trust this person to have the character and integrity and responsibility to be in charge of the use of nuclear weapons? If the answer to that question is no, I think you skip the questions. This is someone whose own cabinet, his Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, his Vice President, Mike Pence, his Attorney General, Bill Barr, someone whom just by chance I happen to know and like because we worked together in the Reagan White House. All these people say he's manifestly unfit. Dan Coates, our own senator from Indiana, who served as head of national intelligence under Trump, has also said much the same thing. Why would these people say that if it weren't true? And why do we doubt their witness as we make our decisions about who we support? I'd like to get back to a situation where we had two parties, one center left, one center right, balance each other, who check each other, who engage us in the debate of ideas, which is all about what democracy is and how we live as a free people. But each of them having underlying respect for, commitment to the rule of law, the thing that makes us stand out for now, 2+ centuries. Get back to that. I pray for that. And I pray for it for myself, for my children. I hope that happens, but it hasn't happened yet. And until Donald Trump is no longer a person who has even a chance of being in the White House, we're not going to get back to that, and the Republican Party is not going to return to what it needs to be.
But why support someone like Kamala Harris, who, as I mentioned earlier, is at essentially philosophical cross purposes with traditional conservatism instead of a different candidate, such as, say, the Libertarian candidate, Chase Oliver?
The Libertarian candidate you just mentioned is known to a fraction of the people who live in the United States of America. He is not going to be the next president of the United States. I mean, you face up to in life, you face up to the choices that are in front of you. Those of us with children know that you will hear someone say, well, why is this so? Why can't it be this? And and the response, I hope as a responsible parent, is because that's not your choice. It is going to be A or B. You have the responsibility to choose. You have the responsibility to make that choice in a responsible way. One of these two people is going to be president of the United States. One of them, in my judgment, is manifestly unfit. That judgment is shared by people who worked with him in his cabinet and in the White House. He is manifestly unfit. I disagree with her on any number of issues. Issues that used to be the most important things in our politics. Now the most important thing in our politics is, do we share a commitment to the rule of law? Do we share a commitment to the peaceful transfer of power? Do we share the understanding that character is the most important thing for anyone who bears that solemn trust and responsibility? Maybe when I was younger I got spoiled because I worked with a person who, whatever you thought of him, everybody knew he was sincere, he was decent, he was well motivated, and he had personal character. His name was Ronald Reagan. Biggest blessing of certainly my career to have a chance to work with him. But I cannot support, in my conscience, I cannot support someone who is unworthy of that office and threatens all kinds of danger to the fundamental things on which this country was built. So, my choice is I'm going to support the other person who has a realistic chance of being president of the United States, because she is better than he is on this core issue. And if that is at cost to some of the, small p policy issue things, whether tax rates are going to be at a certain level or not, whether the federal government is going to have more of a role in some things than I think it should have, whether even some of the judges she appoints would not be the judges that I would appoint or would recommend be appointed, those simply pale into insignificance beside the larger question we face. There is no instance in history where making a bargain, I will support this person whom I know to lack character, whom I know is wrong on these large fundamental issues. I'll support him because I want to achieve this result or that result. And going back to when I was in school, we call this Dr. Faust, the Faustian bargain. There's no situation where that's proved right. There is no situation in history where choosing someone who lacks fundamental character and decency is the right choice. Of course, for our history, there's been all kinds of issues that have divided people. And when let's talk about the first Hoosier president, so far the only Hoosier president, Benjamin Harrison, whose presidential site happens to be in Indianapolis, and I've had a chance to contribute out there. One of the big issues that divided the country that day was tariffs. How high should tariffs be? Should we have a protective tariff? Huge issue. Divided people. What do we think about that now? What we know about Benjamin Harrison is that he was a person of decency and character. What we know about his opponent, and he ran against him a couple times, what we know about Grover Cleveland, who won one and lost one against Benjamin Harrison, that he was a person of character, whatever his views may have been on tariffs or any of the things about which people fought 120 years ago. All right, someday people will look back at our generation, and they'll look at what people proposed in terms of tax policy. They'll look what people proposed in terms of social services policy. They'll look at whether the states should have control of this issue or the federal government should have control. That's not what they're going to remember us for. They're going to remember us for whether we preserved peaceful transfer of power. We preserved the rule of law. We preserved the fundamental things on which the country is founded on. And I am more loyal to them than I am to any political party or anyone's views on any particular issue. My choice is I'm for the country's fundamental values. We have to face up to it. And if the cost is that there's some policies enacted with which I disagree, okay, that'll go back and forth. But if we lose the idea that you accept the results of an election, that you don't call up people and say, find me enough votes to flip this state, that you don't sponsor fake electors, that you don't send a crowd, a mob to Capitol Hill to try and interrupt the counting of electoral votes, oh my God. If we make the wrong choice on that, we've thrown away the heritage. And it's not that my voice is so important, but we all look in the mirror. We all answer to our own conscience. And for whatever role I have and people interested in anything I say, I won't be part of it.
How much weight do you think these endorsements will carry?
I don't know. I think some people do look at them. I think, candidly, and I've talked about being candid and facing reality, Indiana is a state that is very unlikely to do anything but vote for Trump. It will be more interested to me, just as sort of my interest in politics, to see what the margin is, whether the margin is different, to see how fast Indiana is called for the Republican candidate. Sometimes the polls close and 30 seconds later Indiana lights up red on, every network's map. So I'll look at it in this way. But there are, 7, 8 states where it's going to be a difference. There are people who struggle with this in that, as you pointed out, Garrett, they disagree strongly with Kamala Harris, including issues very important to them. But they also know in their heart of hearts, if nowhere else, they know what Trump is. And they're struggling with what's the right thing to do. And if the fact that people whose sort of political values they share, who've worked with Reagan, who've worked with George H.W. Bush, who've worked with George W. Bush, who are quite conservative individuals, I know most of them personally, that they say, we can't do this. All right, if that tips for one or a dozen or a couple of hundred, then we've done our part.
Would you consider returning to the Republican fold in 2028?
Let's see where the party is and who we nominate. And the answer is of course. I mean, if we nominate someone who returns us to, we stand for these fundamental values far more than we stand for these political positions, important as they are to us, of course I would. It's not like, this position has very much to do with the individual who's been nominated and candidly what's become a kind of, I mean, I don't want to offend anybody, but it is cult-like adherence to him. You know, he's the one who said I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and it wouldn't cost me a vote. I have asked some people whom I know are Trump supporters, but with whom we both stayed friendly. You know, I've said, you know, is there anything he could do or say that would make you not support him? And people don't have an answer to that. If we move away from that and back to where we, you know, were, which will take some time and effort, but if we move back to where our parties fight it out, but they fight it out on, you know, a battleground defined by the rule of law and respect the results, and if you lose, you're still an American, and that's more important, of course I could support a future Republican. That's not the issue here.
Is there room in the Republican Party in 2024 and in American politics more broadly in 2024 for Reagan-style conservatism?
There's no presidential candidate who embodies that. I mean, I think that just has to be acknowledged. There is no one who is going to be the next president of the United States who embodies Reagan-style conservative, or for that matter, you know, George H.W. Bush or George W. Bush conservatism. We're not, or Mitt Romney conservatism. You know, and those are people, those are four different human beings whose views don't match up on everything. But no, right now there's no room for that. Let's just be candid. Are there particular people in the House of Representatives who are still there? Yes. Are there particular people in the United States Senate who are still there? Yes. Even they are, with rare and noble exceptions, unwilling to say what they know to be true about Trump. Look, if you talk to people, and you know, one of the things about being involved in politics is you get to know people. And as in everything else, I mean, you know, people are more candid in private than they are publicly. I mean, that's true in families. I mean, it's just true in all human relationships. It's either good or bad that I've had the opportunity to get to know some of these people. I know what they say in private. I know what they think about Donald Trump. Candidly, I know how repelled they are by them. But people will rationalize all kinds of things, and right now to be opposed to Trump is a career ender. I admire people like Adam Kinzinger, who spoke at the Democratic National Convention, like Liz Cheney, whom I've had the pleasure of getting to know, who's very conservative. And my God, her dad, you know, Dick Cheney, the former vice president, formerly viewed as very dark by people in the Democratic Party, who recognize and stand up about what Donald Trump is. She was willing to give up a seat in Congress to fight that. She was willing possibly to give up her entire future political career to stand up for that. I have great admiration for that, for people who do that. I mean, that's when you're tested, when you're willing to stand up even at personal cost. Personal cost for me, there's some, but it's very little compared to what some of these other people have given up, and I'm proud of them. So there are people in Congress in the Republican Party. There are people in state houses in the Republican Party who remain committed to the right kind of values, but are silent now. Okay, I understand it. I hope I would have made a different choice, but will those people, or at least some of them, be part of rebuilding if we get past this? I hope so. One thing you don't do is you know, write people off forever or say, no, I'm sorry, you weren't here at the right time, so, you know, a curse on you. That's not my approach to things. I may be disappointed now that some haven't stood up, but, you know, we just move forward and do what's best for the country, even if people weren't with us at every step.
From what you saw of President Reagan, having worked in his White House, how do you think he would have voted in 2024?
Oh, I think he'd vote for Kamala Harris because the things that Donald Trump has done, Ronald Reagan would be personally repelled by Donald Trump's character and lack of decency. More fundamentally, Ronald Reagan would never support anyone who challenged the results of an election. Ronald Reagan would never support anyone who told people to march on the Capitol or they won't have a country again. Ronald Reagan would never have stood for such a threat to the most important things about this country. And I will tell you this too, in terms of the policy issues, whether you want to talk on a social issue such as abortion, we want to talk on an economic issue such as taxes, Ronald Reagan had sincere, deep convictions on those issues, which he articulated and firmly believed in. He was never articulating something that he didn't believe because he thought it would help in an election. He would have had no trouble taking the personal measure of Donald Trump.
Peter Rusthoven, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Garret.
That was Peter Rusthoven, former associate counsel to President Ronald Reagan. He's one of a dozen Republican former White House lawyers who have endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris for president. Remember, you can watch All Indiana Politics every Sunday morning at 9:30, only on Wish TV. I'm Garret Bergquist. Thanks for listening.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Watch All Indiana Politics live Sunday mornings at 9:30 on Wish TV and at wishtv.com. Subscribe to this podcast and listen weekly here on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And be sure to discover even more great podcasts at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.